Get out of her way, the boy said, laughing, and shoved Emily's wheelchair so hard it spun sideways into the table leg. The coffee cup hit the floor and shattered. The diner went dead quiet, 40 people, not one of them moved. If you've ever watched someone get hurt while the world just stood there and did nothing, this story is going to hit you somewhere deep. Stay with us all the way to the end and drop a comment telling us what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Emily Carter had been coming to Rosie's Diner on Route 9 for 3 years. She knew which booth had the wobbly table leg. She knew that the coffee was always too hot for the first 10 minutes and perfect after that. She knew that Rosie herself, 62 years old gray, braid down her back, reading glasses perpetually perched on her forehead, would have a slice of lemon pound cake waiting for her on the second Tuesday of every month, because that was the day Emily's mother had died 5 years ago. And Rosie never forgot a thing like that. Rosie's Diner was the one place in Maplewood where Emily Carter felt like a person first and a wheelchair second. That particular Tuesday morning in October started the way all her best mornings started, with the smell of maple syrup and the sound of the bell above the door and the familiar weight of belonging settling over her shoulders like a warm coat. She navigated through the door the way she always did, right wheel first, a slight angle, a practice push, and rolled to her usual spot near the window, where the morning light came in clean and soft. She had her canvas tote bag on her lap. Inside her journal, a worn paperback she'd been reading for 2 weeks, in the small orange prescription bottle that she pretended wasn't there most days. She was 22 years old. She had a spinal condition that had put her in a wheelchair at 16. She had also, in those 6 years since, earned an associate's degree in graphic design, built a small freelance client base from her apartment, and learned through what she would only describe as the hard grinding kind of learning how to move through a world that was not built for her without letting that fact take up permanent residence in her chest. Most days she succeeded. This was not going to be one of those days. She didn't notice the 4 boys at first. They were in the large corner booth, the one usually reserved for families. 4 teenage boys, maybe 16, 17, the kind that traveled in packs and fed off each other's worst instincts. Baseball caps, oversized hoodies, the particular brand of loud that comes from boys who have never once in their lives been told to be quiet by someone they respected. Emily ordered her usual: scrambled eggs, wheat toast, the small orange juice. She opened her book. She was 12 pages from the end, and she'd been saving those 12 pages like a gift to herself. The noise from the corner booth rose and fell. She was good at tuning things like that out. Years of practice. She didn't look up when their laughter spiked. She didn't look up when one of them said something that made the others pound the table. She kept her eyes on her page and reminded herself that she was 12 pages from the end, and the coffee was just reaching the right temperature, and Rosie had waved at her from behind the counter, and everything was fine. Everything was fine. Then the shadow fell across her table. She looked up. The tallest of the 4 boys was standing 3 feet away from her, arms folded, head tilted with the casual cruelty of someone who had identified a target and found no reason not to approach it. He was maybe 17. Dark hair, the kind of face that might have been handsome if anything behind it had been worth anything at all. "That's a pretty cool ride," he said. His friends still at the booth were already laughing. Emily looked at him for exactly 1 second. She had done this before the calculation, fast as a blink. Engage or disengage. Respond or look away. Every woman in a wheelchair develops a taxonomy of these moments, a mental filing system for the shape of a threat. This one felt wrong. She looked back at her book. "Hey," his voice sharpened, "I'm talking to you." "I heard you," Emily said without looking up. "I'm not interested." The laughter from the booth got louder. She heard him shift his weight, heard the squeak of his sneaker on the linoleum, heard the particular quality of silence that forms in a room when everyone in it suddenly understands that something is happening and has collectively decided not to be involved. She hated that silence more than anything that followed it. "You deaf too," he said, "or just rude?" Emily closed her book. She placed it on the table. She looked at him directly, the way her mother had taught her, chin level, eyes steady, no apology in the posture. "I'm neither," she said. "I'd like to eat my breakfast. Please leave me alone." Something moved in his face. It wasn't embarrassment. It was its opposite, the particular kind of pride that gets inflamed by being spoken to with dignity by someone you've already decided doesn't deserve to have any. He pulled out the chair across from her and dropped into it. I think I'll sit here, he said. Behind him, one of his friends let out a low whistle. Emily's hands went flat on the table. She was breathing carefully. She knew how to be careful. She'd been careful her whole life. Careful with her body, careful with her words, careful with the amount of space she asked the world to give her, because the world had always made clear that space was a negotiation she was unlikely to win. That seat's taken, she said. By who? She didn't answer. She reached for her coffee. He reached out and put his hand on the cup before she could. The diner had gone quiet now, not the comfortable quiet of early morning, but the hell-breath quiet of a room full of people who can see a car accident coming and have already decided not to look. At the counter, Rosie had her hand on the phone, not picking it up, just resting it there. A man in a booth near the door had his fork halfway to his mouth and hadn't moved it in 30 seconds. A woman with 2 young kids had turned her children toward the window and was speaking to them in a low, urgent voice. No one moved. Emily looked at the boy's hand on her coffee cup. Then she looked at his face. Please, she said, and she hated the word as soon as it left her, hated that she'd had to say it, hated the slight uptick it gave to the corner of his mouth. Please what? He said, and then his friend arrived. She hadn't heard him come. One moment she was looking at the boy across the table, and the next there was a presence to her left, one of the others, shorter. Thick-necked with a grin that didn't reach his eyes, and then something shoved her wheelchair from the side, and the world tilted hard, and she grabbed the table, and the coffee cup went over, and the hot coffee spread across the tabletop and hit her lap, and she gasped, and her plate went with it, and the eggs and toast and everything she'd been quietly looking forward to since she'd woken up that morning hit the floor in a crash that rang out through the whole diner like a gunshot. The room lurched. Emily's hands were gripping the wheels. Her lap was burning. Her book was on the floor, splayed open, pages down. She did not cry. She was not going to cry. She pressed her jaw together, and she breathed through her nose, and she did not cry. Whoops, the short one said. The laughter from the booth was different now, louder, less restrained, the kind of laughter that had crossed a line and knew it and didn't care. The tall boy leaned back in the chair he'd stolen and looked at the mess on the floor with an expression of theatrical innocence. You should be more careful, he said. Emily said nothing. Her hands were shaking on the wheels. She could feel eyes on her from every table in the room, and she could feel the quality of those eyes. Not the eyes of people who were about to stand up, not the eyes of people working towards something, but the eyes of people who were watching the way you watch a storm through a window from the safety of the other side of the glass. She wanted to be sick. She wanted to scream. She did neither. What she did was look at the nearest occupied table, a man in his 50s, heavy set a cup of black coffee in front of him, a wedding ring on his left hand, and she looked at him the way you look at someone when you need them to be better than they're planning to be. He looked down at his coffee. Emily Carter closed her eyes for 3 seconds. When she opened them, she started to move her wheelchair. She was going to roll to the counter. She was going to ask Rosie to call the police. She was going to do this quietly and without drama because that was what the situation required, and because she was not going to give these boys one more thing to use. That was the plan. The short one stepped directly in front of her wheels. Where you going, he said. She stopped. The wheels stopped. She looked up at him. Move, she said. Make me. The word landed in the room like a stone in still water, and the ripples went out in every direction, and still no one moved. Still no one said anything. The man with the coffee cup shifted in his seat. The woman at the window was now crying quietly into her hand, but still she didn't turn around. And the tall boy, the one who had started it, stood up from the stolen chair and walked slowly to stand beside his friend, and he looked down at Emily with an expression that was the most honest thing about him. No performance now, no theater, just the flat, naked satisfaction of someone who had identified the limit of another person's safety and was enjoying what he found there. You're in the wrong place, he said. Emily's voice when it came was very quiet. No, she said, I'm not. She wasn't sure where it came from. She wasn't sure if it was courage or simply the absence of anything left to lose. But she looked at him, really looked at him past the performance and the grin and the friends watching from the booth, and she said it again. I'm not in the wrong place. You are. Something flickered in his face. It wasn't contrition. It wasn't anything close to it. But something moved, some small recognition, and in that half second his expression was unguarded. She saw what was actually there, nothing. Not malice, not ambition, not even real cruelty, just the loud, bored nothing of a boy who had never once in his life been asked to feel the weight of what his hands could do to someone else. Then it was gone and the grin came back, and he reached out and shoved her wheelchair. Hard. Not like before. This was deliberate. Both hands full force, the way you shove something you want moved from where it's standing. Emily's wheelchair rolled back and hit the table behind her, hard enough to knock the ketchup bottle onto its side, hard enough to make the couple sitting there scramble, hard enough to make Emily grip the armrest with everything she had to keep herself from going over. The sound it made was enormous. The man with the coffee cup stood up. Everyone in the diner looked at him. He was maybe 55, Emily thought. He had the kind of face that had spent a lot of years outdoors. His jacket was a faded green canvas, and his hands were large and rough, and he stood there for a moment, and the whole room waited. He walked over. He walked past the two boys standing beside Emily's wheelchair, and he crouched down and he started picking up her things from the floor. Her book, the pages it had fallen open, to which he smoothed carefully before closing it, the canvas tote bag which had landed upside down and spilled her journal, and the orange prescription bottle which he picked up and placed back in the bag without looking at it, which was the most dignified thing anyone had done for her in the last 15 minutes. "Here you go," he said, and handed her the bag. His voice was low, not loud, not confrontational. But when he stood up and looked at the tall boy, there was something in his posture that made the boy take a single step back. "You should go," the man said. Not a yell, not a speech, 3 words flat and certain, the way you say something when you know you mean it. The tall boy looked at him, looked at Emily, looked at his friends, laughed. "Old man," he said, "sit back down." The man held his gaze for a long moment, and Emily watched his face, and she could see the calculation happening there, the same calculation she had been making all morning, the same one every person in that diner had been making, and she saw him weigh it, and she saw what losing looks like on the face of someone who knows they can't win alone. He sat back down. The laughter from the boys was long and satisfied. Emily did not look at the man. She didn't want to see his face. She stared at the window instead, at the gray October sky outside, at the parking lot, at nothing. Her hands had stopped shaking. What replaced the shaking was something quieter and heavier. Not anger anymore, just a kind of settled, terrible understanding about the way the world was arranged and who it was arranged for. She thought about her mother, about the things her mother used to say to her in the first year after the wheelchair when Emily was 16 and furious, and the fury had nowhere to go. Her mother used to sit on the edge of her bed and hold her hand and say, "The world is going to be hard for you in ways it isn't hard for other people. But your job isn't to fix that. Your job is to stay yourself." Emily had tried. She had tried every day for 6 years. She was trying now. The boys had retreated to their booth. Not because anything had changed, nothing had changed, but because the moment had run out of steam the way cruelty does when it can't find any more friction to burn against. They were talking loudly, throwing food scraps at each other, deliberately, not looking at her, which was its own kind of cruelty. A waitress. Emily didn't recognize, young, maybe 19, with a dark ponytail and a uniform collar that was too big for her neck, came and began cleaning up the spilled food. She didn't speak. She didn't look at Emily. Her movements were quick and practiced and entirely avoidant. "Thank you," Emily said quietly. The girl paused, looked at her for a moment, then looked away. "I'll get you a new plate," she said. "I'm not hungry anymore," Emily said. The girl said nothing. She finished wiping the floor and went back behind the counter, and Emily watched her go and thought, she's scared. She's 19 and scared and working for tips, and she doesn't know what to do, and that's real and that matters, but it doesn't make this easier to breathe through. At the corner booth, one of the boys said something Emily couldn't fully make out. Something with her name in it, or something he thought was funny. The others erupted. Emily put her hands on her wheels. She was going to leave. She had decided. She was going to roll to the door and leave and go home and call her friend Danielle and tell her what happened and let Danielle be furious on her behalf because Emily was too tired right now to be furious for herself. She was almost to the door. "Hey," the tall boy called after her. "Leaving so soon?" She kept moving. "You forgot your book," he said, and something clattered near her wheels. Her paperback skidded across the floor from a thrown hand landing open and bent at the spine. She stopped. She looked at the book, 12 pages from the end. She leaned down and picked it up. The spine was cracked now, the pages bent. It would never close right again. She put it in her bag. She looked at the door. She was not going to cry in this parking lot. She was not going to give them a window to watch through. She breathed in through her nose 4 counts the way her physical therapist had taught her, and she pushed through the door and out into the cold October air. Inside, behind her, the boys were still laughing. Outside, the sky was the color of old pewter, and the air smelled like rain coming, and the parking lot was empty except for a row of cars along the far fence and one pickup truck with a broken tailgate that had been there since she arrived. She sat in the parking lot in her wheelchair, and she looked at nothing for a long time. A bird landed on the fence across the lot and looked at her and flew away. A car passed on Route 9 without slowing. Emily Carter pressed her hands flat against her thighs and she breathed. She did not leave. She did not leave because somewhere in the part of her that her mother's voice lived, the part that had kept her moving for 6 years through everything that had tried to stop her. Something said wait. She didn't know what she was waiting for. She didn't know that 30 minutes later, the ground would begin to shake. She didn't know that she would hear it before she saw it, a low building vibration that started somewhere down Route 9 and grew into something you felt in your chest before your ears could name it. She didn't know any of that yet, so she sat in the cold parking lot and she breathed and she waited for no reason she could have explained, and the minutes passed and the sky stayed gray, and somewhere out on Route 9 miles away and closing fast, a sound was coming that would change the temperature of everything. Inside Rosie's diner, the boys ordered more food and the diner went back to its sounds and its smells and its careful, shameful equilibrium. And the man with the coffee cup stared into his cup, and the waitress with the too big collar wiped down the counter, and Rosie stood behind the register with her hand still resting on the phone she hadn't picked up. And the space where Emily Carter had been sitting was empty. Now the table still faintly damp from where the coffee had gone over. And no one said anything. And the minutes passed. And from somewhere far down Route 9, barely audible, something began to grow. The cold hit her differently out here. Not the sharp, clean cold of a morning she'd chosen to walk into, but the kind that settles against you when you've stopped moving and have nothing left to do but feel it. Emily sat in the parking lot of Rosie's diner and listened to Route 9 breathe. A truck somewhere. Wind moving through the dry grass along the fence line. The muffled sound of laughter from inside the boys. Again, always the boys seeping through the glass like something that refused to stay contained. She told herself she was resting. She knew she was hiding. There was a difference, and she had always been honest with herself about things like that, even when honesty cost her something. Right now, it cost her the story she wanted to tell herself that she'd left on her own terms, that rolling out that door had been a choice made from strength. It hadn't. It had been a retreat. Clean and necessary, maybe, but a retreat all the same. And Emily Carter had spent 6 years learning that the difference between surviving and surrendering lived in whether or not you were willing to call a thing what it was. She called it what it was, and then she sat with it the way you sit with pain that doesn't have a remedy, not trying to fix it, not trying to outrun it, just letting it take up the space it needed so it didn't take up more. Her phone was in her bag. She could call Danielle. Danielle would answer on the second ring, and she would say Emily's name in that particular way, stretched out, both syllables weighted, and Emily would know from that alone that she was already angry on her behalf and ready to drive 40 minutes to Maplewood just to stand in that parking lot and be furious alongside her. She didn't call. Not yet. Not because she didn't want to, she wanted to more than almost anything, but because she knew that the moment she heard Danielle's voice, she would come apart, and she wasn't ready to come apart in a parking lot on Route 9 while 4 boys sat 20 feet away inside a warm building, eating food she'd paid for and laughing. She wasn't going to give them that. She gripped the armrests of her wheelchair instead. Both hands firm, a thing her physical therapist, a quiet man named Marcus, who had worked with her since she was 17, had taught her when the emotion is too large for the moment, give your hands something solid to hold. It doesn't fix anything, he'd said, but it keeps you in your body, and right now, being in your body is enough. Being in her body was enough. She breathed in through her nose. She counted. She breathed out. Inside the diner, the bell above the door rang, someone arriving or leaving. She couldn't tell, and the sound of it cut through her chest with a precision that startled her because it was the same bell she'd heard 3 years ago when she'd rolled in for the first time, nervous and new, and hoping that this one place would be different, and it had been. And now she wasn't sure what it was anymore. That was the thing they'd taken from her that she hadn't even registered losing yet. Not her breakfast, not her book with its ruined spine. The diner. 3 years of Tuesday mornings and lemon pound cake, and Rosie waving at her from behind the counter. All of it now had a before and an after, and she was sitting right at the fault line between them. She pressed her jaw together. A car turned into this parking lot from Route 9, slow and older model with a cracked bumper, and the driver glanced at her as he parked. Not unkindly, just the neutral glance of someone noting what's there, and she watched him get out and go inside without stopping, without asking, without doing anything at all, which was exactly what she had expected and still somehow landed like a small, fresh blow. This was what it looked like, she thought. This was the texture of it. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just this, a parking lot, a gray sky of 40 people who had watched something happen and made a choice that cost them nothing and cost her everything. And now the day continued the way it always did, car by car, step by bootstep, the ordinary world moving right through the space where something terrible had just occurred without even breaking stride. She thought about the man with the coffee cup. She didn't want to think about him, but she did because he was the most complicated thing in the room, and her mind kept returning to him the way a tongue keeps finding a sore tooth. He had stood up. That mattered. She wanted to hold on to that. He had stood up and crossed the room and crouched down on the floor and picked up her things with those large, careful hands and handed her bag back to her and said 3 words that had cost him something, even if they hadn't been enough. And then he had sat back down. That mattered too. She understood why. She understood in the clear-eyed, unsentimental way that 6 years in a wheelchair teaches you to understand the gap between what people want to do and what they actually do, that he had weighed the 4 boys against his own aloneness in that room and made a calculation that felt true to him even if it failed her. She understood it. She didn't forgive it. Understanding and forgiving were different countries, and she was not obligated to visit both. The laughter came through the glass again. She looked at the door. Back inside, against her better judgment, something in her was still listening, still tracking. The way prey animals track a predator even through walls. Not because they plan to go back, but because the nervous system doesn't know how to stop. She heard voices rising, then a crash. Something falling, maybe dishes, maybe a chair. She couldn't tell. Then laughter again, that same hyena frequency that had followed her out the door. She put her hands on her wheels. She told herself she wasn't going back in. She went back in. The bell above the door announced her, and the room shifted in that subtle collective way it does when the person who left unexpectedly returns. The man with the coffee cup looked up. The young waitress with the too big collar froze mid-motion. Rosie behind the register straightened. The boys in the corner booth saw her, and the tall one, the one with the dark hair, the one who had shoved her chair, smiled wide and slow, like he'd been expecting this. "Forget something," he called out. Emily didn't answer him. She rolled straight to the counter. She pulled up to it and looked at Rosie, and Rosie looked at her, and something passed between them. In that look, a conversation that didn't need words, the kind that happens between 2 people who know each other well enough to skip the preamble. "Call someone," Emily said, low, steady, just for Rosie. Rosie held her gaze for 2 full seconds. Then she said very quietly, "I already tried, honey. They said they'd send someone when they could." Emily absorbed that. How long ago? 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Emily looked at the clock above the pie case. 20 minutes of waiting for a patrol car that hadn't come and wasn't guaranteed to come and might arrive to find nothing more than 4 boys finishing their food and preparing to leave of their own accord, satisfied, untouched, confirmed in everything they believed about what they could get away with and who would stop them. "Okay," Emily said. "You should go home," Rosie said. Her voice wasn't cold. It was the opposite. It was the voice of a woman who was worried, genuinely worried, and didn't know what else to do with that worry except aim it toward the only solution that felt like protection. "Come back tomorrow. I'll have the pound cake ready." Emily looked at her. At this woman who had remembered the anniversary of her mother's death for 5 years running. At this woman who had saved her a window seat and kept a ramp at the side door and never once made her feel like accommodation was a burden. "I'm not leaving," Emily said. Rosie opened her mouth, closed it, nodded once. Emily turned her chair around and faced the room. This was the moment. She could feel it, the room feeling it, the quality of attention shifting the way it shifts when something has changed and no one is sure yet what. She hadn't come back in to confront them. She hadn't come back in with a plan. She had come back in because something in her refused on a level below strategy, below conscious thought, to let the parking lot be the last chapter. Refused to let the cold in the gray sky and the sound of their laughter through the glass be the punctuation on this morning. She rolled to her table by the window where the morning light came in clean and soft, where the coffee cup had been, where her book had been before they'd thrown it on the floor. She sat down. She put her bag on the table. She looked out the window. She heard one of the boys say something. She didn't catch the words. She didn't need to. She came back, another one said in a tone of genuine astonishment that was almost funny, would have been funny in any other context. Yeah, she did, said the tall one, and there was something different in his voice now, not amusement, something that hadn't been there before, harder, less casual. She'd taken something from him by coming back. She'd violated the script. And boys like this, she knew, were dangerous in direct proportion to how closely their world tracked their expectations. She had just done something they hadn't expected. She could feel that landing in the room like a change in pressure. The young waitress came to her table. She put down a glass of water without being asked. She still didn't quite look at Emily, but she put the glass down carefully like it was an apology in object form. And Emily said, "Thank you." And the girl said, "The new eggs will be up in a few minutes." And Emily said, "I didn't order new eggs." And the girl said very quietly, "Rosie did." Emily looked over at the counter. Rosie had her back to the room, busy with something, her gray braid moving as she worked. Emily felt something loosen in her chest, just slightly, just enough. She opened her journal. She was going to write. She didn't know what yet. Sometimes she wrote about her clients, about the design work she was doing, little notes on color and composition that kept her eyes sharp. Sometimes she wrote things her mother had said that she was afraid of forgetting. Today she didn't have words for any of that. So she wrote the date and the time, and then I came back in. That matters. She stared at that sentence. It wasn't enough, and it was everything. Everything. The boys had gone quiet, not the quiet of people who had calmed down. She could feel that this was a different kind. The held breath quiet of a group deciding something among themselves. Low voices. The particular tight rhythm of a conversation being had in whispers, which is always more alarming than the one being had out loud. The man with the coffee cup was still there. He had not left. She noticed that. He was on his third cup or his fourth, and he was doing what she had done, tracking through walls, listening. His hands were wrapped around his mug, and his elbows were on the table, and he was not reading anything, not looking at his phone, just sitting there with the posture of a man who has decided that leaving would be the wrong thing and hasn't decided yet what the right thing is. She wanted to tell him she saw him. She didn't. That conversation would cost them both things they couldn't afford right now. The corner booth erupted, not in laughter this time, in movement. Sudden, coordinated, the kind of movement that has been decided rather than arrived at. 3 of the 4 boys sliding out of the booth at the same time, coming to their feet. Emily heard the scrape of it, heard the change in the room's breathing. The man with the coffee cup put his mug down. The tall boy stayed seated. He was watching her across the room with an expression she couldn't fully read, calculating, curious like a chess player, considering a move that isn't what his opponent expects. His 3 friends fanned out, not toward the door, toward her. Emily's hands went to her wheels. She didn't move yet. Moving too soon would make it worse. She'd learned that too. The particular geometry of confrontation, the way that flinching before contact lands, is sometimes what brings the contact. So she waited, hands on wheels, jaw set, her journal still open in front of her, the pen still in her right hand. The shortest one, the thick-necked one who had shoved her chair the first time, stopped 3 feet away and tilted his head exactly the way a dog does when it's curious about something. "You got nerve," he said. "I'll give you that." "I'm eating breakfast," Emily said. "You are not eating anything." "I'm waiting for it." He glanced at his friends. Something moved between them, amusement and something sharper underneath it. "I think you should go," he said. "You said that already." "I'm saying it again." "I heard you the first time," Emily said. My hearing is fine, it's just my legs that don't work. The room inhaled. She hadn't planned to say it. It came from somewhere below, planning from the same place that had turned her chair around and brought her back through that door, the place that had her mother's voice in it, in 6 years of grinding hard-won refusal to be smaller than she was. The thick-necked boy blinked. For a single second, he didn't know what to do with that. She'd taken the thing he was wielding, the wheelchair, her body, the fact of her difference, and she'd said it out loud herself without shame, without performance, just as a plain and factual statement, and it had disarmed him in a way that yelling wouldn't have. That crying wouldn't have, that any emotional response wouldn't have, because he had prepared for those, and he had not prepared for this. The second passed. His face hardened. He reached out and put his hand on her journal. I think you should take your hand off her things. The voice came from the counter, not Rosie. The man with the coffee cup was standing. He hadn't announced it. He hadn't made a speech about it. He was just standing the way a person stands when they've stopped considering and started deciding, and his voice had the flat, final quality of someone who had already run the calculation and arrived at the other side of it. The thick-necked boy turned. Didn't we already do this? He said. Yeah, the man said. We did, and I sat back down. That was wrong. I'm not sitting back down again. The whole room went absolutely still. Emily looked at him. At this man whose name she didn't know, whose green canvas jacket was worn at the elbows, whose large hands were at his sides open, not fists, just open and steady. She looked at his face. He wasn't angry. He wasn't performing bravery. He was just there. Present in a way he hadn't been the first time, as though something had shifted in the time since he'd sat back down, and he had been sitting with the weight of that shift and had finally put it down. You need to back up, the thick-necked boy said. This isn't your business. She's in my diner, the man said. That makes it my business. Your diner, the boy looked around with theatrical amusement. You own this place. No, the man said, but I've been coming here 20 years, and I've never once seen somebody treated the way you just treated that young woman. And I'm telling you right now, it ends. Whatever you're thinking about doing next, it ends. The tall boy, still in the booth, was watching all of this with that same calculating expression. He hadn't moved. That worried Emily more than the three who had. The thick-necked boy took a step toward the man. The man didn't move. You're going to get hurt, old man, the boy said. Maybe, the man said, but you're going to remember this day, and not the way you're planning to. A sound came from the booth. The tall boy laughing, but it was different, shorter, less certain. The other customers in the diner were doing different things now. The couple who had been at the table Emily's wheelchair had struck were both standing. The woman had her phone out. The man had pushed his chair back from the table in a way that said he hadn't decided yet, but he was closer to deciding than he'd been 5 minutes ago. The waitress with the too big collar was behind the counter next to Rosie. She had her own phone to her ear. Her eyes were wide and her voice was low, and Emily couldn't hear what she was saying, but she could see the shape of the words, and they looked like an address. Something was beginning to shift. Not dramatically. Not the way it shifts in movies. Not a rallying moment. Not a speech. Not a crowd suddenly rising. More like the way ice shifts on a lake in early spring. You can't see it happening. You can't point to the moment. You just notice at some point that the surface is different from what it was, and you understand that the change has been accumulating underneath for longer than you knew. The thick-necked boy was still 3 feet from the man with the coffee cup. The tall boy was still in the booth, but he had straightened now, elbows off the table, posture changed. Something in his arithmetic wasn't adding up the same way it had been. And then from outside, from far down Route 9, barely audible through the walls and the glass, something else began. Emily heard it first because she was closest to the window. A sound she didn't immediately recognize. Not a car, not a truck. Something more distributed than that, more than one engine, the frequencies overlapping and building. And she turned and looked through the window at the empty parking lot and the gray October sky and the road beyond. Nothing yet, just the road. But the sound was getting louder. Rosie heard it next. Emily saw it happen, saw Rosie's hand stop moving, saw her lift her head, saw her look at the window with an expression that Emily couldn't read. Something between recognition and relief. And it didn't make sense yet because there was nothing to see, just sound, just that growing layered vibration that was becoming something you felt in your sternum, more than heard with your ears. The tall boy turned his head. He was looking at the window now, at the sound that was becoming undeniably the sound of engines. Many engines more than Emily had ever heard together. A sound that didn't belong to any single thing but felt collective, organized, purposeful, moving in formation down Route 9 toward Rosie's diner, like weather that had been building for miles. "What is that?" one of the boys said. Nobody answered. The sound grew and grew, and the floor began almost imperceptibly to vibrate beneath them all. Emily Carter sat with her hands on the armrests of her wheelchair, and she watched the tall boy's face go through three different expressions in the span of 2 seconds: confusion, calculation, and then something that, for the first time all morning, looked very much like unease. The parking lot outside the window was still empty, but not for long. The sound hit the building now like a physical thing, not deafening, not violent, but undeniable. The deep chest-level percussion of a formation of motorcycles that had just turned off Route 9 into the parking lot, the sound of engines throttling down in sequence, the specific mechanical choir of machines built for presence and distance arriving together in a place where their presence had not been expected. Rosie set down what she was holding. She looked at the window, and she said very quietly to no one in particular, "Well, here we go." Emily turned back to the window. She saw the first one pull in, then the second, then 5 more, then 10, and the chrome caught the gray October light and threw it back, and the parking lot that had been empty a minute ago was filling bike by bike with a line of motorcycles that stretched back toward Route 9 and kept coming, kept coming, kept coming. The boys in the diner had gone completely silent. All 4 of them, silent. The laughter was gone. The loud, self-satisfied noise that had filled this room for the last 45 minutes was simply gone. And what replaced it was the particular silence of people who have been comfortable and have just for the first time become something else. Emily watched the parking lot fill. She didn't know what this was yet. She didn't know who they were. She didn't know what would happen when they walked through that door. But she noticed with the part of her that had been paying attention to everything all morning, the part that tracked and cataloged and refused to look away, that her hands had released the armrests. For the first time since she'd rolled through that door this morning, her hands were simply resting in her lap. Open, quiet, still. The engine shut down one by one like a sentence coming to its period. And then the parking lot was silent too. And then the door of Rosie's diner opened. The bell above the door had rung all morning. Every time it rang, Emily had heard it as something ordinary. A customer arriving, a customer leaving, the small, mechanical punctuation of a diner doing its normal business. She had stopped hearing it consciously after the first few times, the way you stop hearing a clock tick once you've been in a room long enough. This time she heard it. Everyone heard it. The bell rang once clean and clear, and the door opened, and the first man stepped through, and the room did something Emily had never felt a room do before. It didn't just go quiet, it went still, a total physical stillness, like every person in it had simultaneously forgotten how to move. He was tall, not theatrical about it, not the kind of tall that announces itself, just the natural settled height of a man who had been that size long enough to stop thinking about it. His hair was gray pulled back. His beard was trimmed close to his jaw. His arms bare from the shoulder down despite the October cold, the leather vest doing nothing to apologize for that, were covered from wrist to deltoid in ink that had been there long enough to have softened at the edges, the colors deepened by years into something that looked less like decoration and more like geology, like the record of a life written in the only medium that couldn't be taken back. The vest said what it said, white background, red letters. Hell's Angels. The patch sat on his chest like a fact. He didn't come in fast. He didn't come in loud. He came in the way a man comes in when he has absolutely nowhere to be except exactly where he is, and he stood just inside the doorway, and he looked at the room. Not aggressively, not with performance. He just looked. The way you look at something when you're reading it, the way a person reads a room when they've spent enough years in enough rooms to know that the story is always there if you know where to find it. Behind him, through the still open door, Emily could see more of them filing into the parking lot. She could hear boots on asphalt. She could hear low voices, the particular register of men communicating in shorthand that comes from years of writing together, knowing each other's habits, trusting each other's read. Then 2 more stepped in behind the first man. Then 3 more. They filled the doorway, not crowding it, just filling it, the way a tide fills a space steady and complete. And they fanned out just inside the entrance without being directed to, with the easy organization of people who didn't need to discuss it. The diner, which had been a place of noise and cruelty and shameful silence 20 minutes ago, was now so quiet Emily could hear the coffee maker behind the counter cycling through its process, the low gurgle of it, absurd against the weight of everything else. The tall boy in the corner booth had not moved, but his face had changed. The calculation Emily had watched running behind his eyes all morning was still running. She could see it, but the variables had changed, and whatever answer he'd been arriving at before was no longer available to him. His three friends had drifted back toward the booth without appearing to decide to. They were standing in a loose cluster, now not quite sitting, not quite standing, the body language of people who can no longer remember what confident looks like. The first man's eyes moved through the room, past the counter, past the tables, past the couple still standing near the back, past the man with the green canvas jacket who was still on his feet, who had gone very still in the way of someone who recognizes authority and is trying to understand what kind. And then his eyes found Emily. She felt it happen before she saw. It felt the weight of his attention land on her the way you feel a hand on your shoulder before you've registered the touch. She looked up, and his eyes were already there, it's already on her, and what she saw in them was not pity. She had a lifetime's education in the particular texture of pity, and this was not it, and it was not anger, not yet, and it was not calculation. It was recognition. The flat, clear, uncomplicated recognition of someone who has seen this before and knows exactly what it is. He held her gaze for 3 seconds, long enough for her to understand that he had read the room and understood it completely, long enough for her to feel for the first time all morning that she was not the only person in this building who knew what had happened here. Then he looked away. He looked at the boys. The thick-necked one, the one who had shoved her chair twice, who had put his hand on her journal, who had been 3 feet from the man in the green canvas jacket when the engine started, took one step back without appearing to notice he'd done it. The first man walked to the counter, not toward the boys, not toward Emily, to the counter with the unhurried certainty of a man who had decided the first move and was making it, and Rosie, 62 years old, gray braid, reading glasses on her forehead, a woman who had seen 62 years worth of people walk through her door and had developed the instinct for all of them, looked at him without flinching and said, "Morning." "Morning," he said. His voice was low, not deep for performance, just naturally low, the kind that carries without effort. "Coffee, if you've got it." "Always," Rosie said. She poured it. Her hands were steady. Emily watched them and was grateful for that, for Rosie's steady hands, for the normalcy of the motion, for the way it said that whatever was about to happen would happen in a place that still knew how to pour coffee. He wrapped both hands around the mug. Didn't drink it yet, just held it the way Emily had been holding her armrest 20 minutes ago, the way the man in the green jacket had been holding his own mug all morning, like something solid was necessary. He said something to Rosie low enough that Emily couldn't hear it. Rosie answered with 2 words and a slight tilt of her head toward the corner booth. He nodded. That was the whole exchange. Then he turned, and he turned slowly the way you turn when you're not in a hurry, because you know that the turning itself is the thing that is doing the work. And he faced the room, and he faced the corner booth, and he looked at the tall boy. The tall boy looked back. For a moment, one long, suspended, airless moment, it was just that. The two of them across the room looking at each other. The diner so quiet you could hear the traffic on Route 9. Then the man said, "You want to tell me what happened here?" Not loud, not aggressive, just a question asked simply in the tone of a man who already knows the answer and is giving someone the chance to be honest about it. The tall boy said nothing. "Okay," the man said. He set his coffee cup on the counter and he walked across the room. Not fast, every step deliberate, even the kind of pace that says, "I'm not angry. I'm something worse than angry. I'm certain." He walked to Emily's table and then he stopped, and he pulled out the chair across from her, the same chair the tall boy had stolen at the beginning of all this, and he turned it around and sat down in it backward, arms folded across the back, and he looked at Emily Carter. The way a person looks at someone they want to actually see. "You all right?" he said. Emily opened her mouth, closed it. She had been holding herself together for over an hour with the concentrated effort of a person who has decided that falling apart is not an option. And those 2 words asked with that particular plainness, with no agenda in them, no performance, no audience hit her somewhere below the armor she'd built. She said no. He nodded, like that was the honest answer, and he was glad she'd given it. My name's Ryder, he said. Emily. Emily. He said it back the way people say a name when they're filing it somewhere they intend to keep it. How long have they been in here? About an hour, she said. What did they do? She told him. Not the full version, not every detail, not the cataloged account she'd been composing in her head all morning. Just the facts flat and clear, because something about the way he'd asked made decoration feel unnecessary. They mocked her. They knocked her plate to the floor. They shoved her chair. Twice. They blocked her path. They put their hands on her things. They did all of this in a room full of people who watched. Ryder listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't make sounds of sympathy or outrage. He just listened with a quality of attention she hadn't felt all morning, the attention of someone who is filing every word. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The people in here, they didn't do anything." "One man tried," Emily said. She glanced at the green jacket. He stood up. They told him to sit down. She paused. He sat down. Ryder didn't look at the man. He looked at Emily. "But he came back up," he said. Not a question. "How did you—" She stopped. "Yes, he did." "I could see it in him when I walked in," Ryder said. "Some people need a minute longer than they should. Doesn't make them wrong people. Just slow ones." Emily looked at him. "You're being generous," she said. "Maybe," he said. "I've been slow myself, a time or two." He unfolded his arms from the back of the chair. "Are you hurt physically?" "The coffee burned my lap. It's not bad." "You sure?" "I've had worse." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded. He pushed back from the chair. He stood up. He turned around. And he looked at the corner booth. What happened next was not a confrontation in any way Emily had a template for. There was no yelling. There was no threat. Nothing you could point to and call a threat. Ryder walked to the corner booth, and he stood beside it, not blocking it, just beside it, and he looked at the tall boy with the flat, patient certainty of a man who has all the time in the world and is not going to use a single second of it to be dramatic. The tall boy looked up at him. He was trying to hold it together. Emily could see it from across the room. The jaw set, the chin lifted, the performance of a confidence that had been draining steadily for the last 5 minutes. "What do you want?" the boy said. "I want you to look at that young woman over there," Ryder said. Silence. "Look at her," Ryder said, still calm, still patient, the words still applying to every single thing about him in a way that was more forceful than volume would have been. The tall boy looked at Emily. Emily did not look away. She met his eyes the way she'd met them all morning, chin-level gaze steady, except that this time there was something different in the room, and they both knew it. "She came in here this morning to have breakfast," Ryder said. "That's all. She came in here to have breakfast in peace in a place she's been coming to for years. And you decided, you and your friends, that she was a good target, that whatever you were bored with, whatever you were trying to prove, she was the right place to put it." He paused. "Is that about right?" The tall boy said nothing. "I'm going to take that as a yes," Ryder said. Behind Ryder, the doorway was still filled. More of the bikers had come inside, not all of them, not the whole formation, but enough that the corner of the diner where the boy stood was now thoroughly surrounded by people who were not going to be told to sit down. They weren't doing anything. They were just there, present, the way a weather system is present. You don't have to do anything to a room when you are collectively the thing the room is most aware of. The tall boy's friends had fully returned to the booth now. The thick-necked one was pressed against the wall. Another one was looking at his phone with the focused desperation of someone pretending to be somewhere else. "I'm going to ask you something," Ryder said, "and I want you to think before you answer. Can you do that?" The tall boy was looking at the table. "Look at me," Ryder said. He looked up. "Why, Ryder said. "Just that, one word." The tall boy blinked. "Why did you do it?" Ryder said. "Not an excuse, not what you were thinking, not what your friends were doing. Why did you think it was okay to put your hands on her chair?" The silence stretched. "I don't—" The boy stopped, started again. "We were just—" "Don't," Ryder said. "Don't do that. Don't tell me you were just doing something. You made choices in this room today. One after another, you made them. Nobody made you do a single one of them. He leaned forward slightly, not threatening, just closing the distance, enough that this was between them now, just the two of them. The way Ryder had made everything in this conversation feel one-on-one, even in a crowded room. I know boys like you. I was a boy like you a long time ago. And someone sat me down once and asked me the same thing I'm asking you, and I didn't have an answer then either. But I'll tell you what I learned. The tall boy was very still. The answer doesn't matter, Bar, Ryder said. The answer to why never matters as much as what you do next. So here's what you're going to do next, all four of you. He stood up straight. You're going to get up, he said. You're going to walk to that young woman's table, and you're going to apologize. Not because I'm standing here, not because my friends are standing there. He didn't gesture toward the doorway. He didn't have to. Because she is a human being who deserved to eat her breakfast in peace, and you took that from her, and that is not something you get to do and walk away from without at least having the courage to name it. The room was so quiet. The tall boy looked at his friends. They were looking at him. There was a question in the look and an answer in the question, and the answer was, this is yours now. This decision, you started this, you carry it. He got up. He stood up from the booth, and he was taller than he'd seen when he was seated, and he stood there for a moment with his hands at his eye and his jaw working, and Emily watched him from across the room, and she thought he's 17. He is 17 years old, and he is going to have to walk across this room and say words he has never said to anyone in his life, and do it in front of more people than he has ever been embarrassed in front of. She was not going to feel sorry for him. She was not going to feel nothing either. He walked. His three friends came with him in a loose cluster behind, not because they wanted to, but because the alternative was staying in the booth alone, and that was somehow worse. They crossed the room. They stopped in front of Emily's table. The tall boy looked at her. The expression on his face was something she would spend a long time afterward trying to name. Not contrition exactly. Not quite shame. Something rawer than either the particular exposure of a person who has been asked to be honest in public and has discovered that they don't know how and has to try anyway. I'm sorry, he said. The words came out unsteady. He said them like someone carrying something heavy, the effort visible, the cost visible. I'm sorry for, he stopped, swallowed, for what we did, for the chair, he glanced at the floor where her plate had been, where her book had been. All of it. I'm sorry. Emily looked at him for a long time. The whole room was looking at her now. She was aware of that of Ryder standing to her left, of the man in the green canvas jacket who had sat back down but was watching, of Rosie behind the counter, of the waitress, with the too big collar, of every customer who had stayed silent all morning and was now holding their breath, waiting to see what she would do with this. She had not planned for this moment. She had been planning for the patrol car that hadn't come, for the parking lot, for getting home, and calling Danielle, for all the small practical steps of a morning that had gone badly and needed to be survived. She had not planned for a 17-year-old boy standing in front of her with his hands at his sides and words in his mouth that she could tell cost him something. She said, I hear you. Not, it's okay. Not, I forgive you. Not, we're fine. Because none of those things were true, and she was not going to say them to make a room of strangers more comfortable. I hear you. That was what she had. It was enough. The tall boy nodded. He looked like he might say something else. He didn't. He looked at Ryder. Ryder said, go. They went. All four of them, out from behind Emily's table, through the room, past the cluster of bikers in the doorway, who parted without comment out through the door. The bell rang behind them. Their footsteps crossed to the parking lot. A car started. 2 cars. Then the sound of engines pulling out onto Route 9 fading gone. The diner let out a breath. It wasn't dramatic. It was almost nothing, just the collective release of a room's tension, the slight shift of chairs and the clearing of throats and the sound of people picking up their coffee cups again. And it was more profound than any speech, because it was real, the way a storm passing is real in your body before your brain has caught up. Ryder came back to Emily's table. He sat down again, same way as before, chair turned around, arms on the back, the posture of someone who is in no hurry. You okay, he said. I keep being asked that, Emily said. Probably going to keep happening for a while. I know. She looked at her hands in her lap. What made you come in here? You could have just stayed in the parking lot. Ryder was quiet for a moment. He looked at the door at the window, at nothing in particular. "We stop for coffee," he said. Emily blinked. "That's it," she said. "We ride long routes," he said. "We stop where we stop. Rosie's has good coffee. We've come through here before." He looked at the counter. "Rosie called a friend of ours about 20 minutes ago. Said there was a situation." "Rosie called you?" "She called someone who called someone," he said. "We were 8 miles out." Emily looked at the counter. Rosie was wiping it down with the same cloth she always used, the particular efficiency of a woman who has been keeping this place running for 30 years and knows that the work doesn't pause for anything. "Rosie," Emily said. Rosie looked up. "Thank you," Emily said. Rosie held her gaze for a moment. Then she picked up her cloth and walked to the end of the counter, and she put both hands on it, and she looked at Emily with 62 years of living in her face, and she said, "I should have called sooner. I should have done more. I'm sorry, honey." The apology landed differently than the boys had. Fuller, heavier, carrying more history in it, the weight of the 20 minutes she'd waited, the phone she'd touched, and put down the careful accommodations she'd made for her own fear. Emily said, "Yeah." And then, "But you called." Rosie nodded once. That was the whole of it. Around them, the diner was coming back to life, a real coming back. Not the false equilibrium of before, not people carefully not looking at each other, but something more unsettled and more alive, the sounds of conversation restarting. Not the same conversation as before, conversations that were aware of what had just happened and were trying to figure out what to do with that awareness. The man in the green canvas jacket stood up. He walked to Emily's table. He stopped at a respectful distance, not crowding, not presuming, and he looked at her with the expression of a man who has been carrying something for the last hour and needs to put it down. "I owe you an apology," he said. "You don't have to." "I do," he said. "I stood up, I said my piece, and then I sat back down because I was afraid of 4 teenage boys, and I'm not going to pretend that was anything other than what it was. You didn't have the option of sitting back down. You were right here the whole time." Emily looked at him, at his large, rough hands and his worn jacket, and the wedding ring on his left hand, and the 4 cups of coffee that had kept him in that seat when every comfortable instinct in him had said to leave. "What's your name?" she said. "Dale," he said. "You stayed, Dale," she said. "When you could have left, you stayed." Something moved through his face, the complicated relief of being seen accurately. "Not enough," he said. "No," she agreed, "but not nothing." He nodded. He put out his hand. She took it. His grip was careful, the way a large person is careful with a smaller one, and he shook her hand once firmly and let go. "Can I buy you breakfast?" he said. "Seems like you should actually get to eat yours." Before Emily could answer, Ryder said from behind her, "Already handled." Dale looked at him, then back at Emily. He almost smiled. "All right then." He went back to his table. He ordered a 5th cup of coffee. He sat down with it, and he looked like a man who had put something heavy in the right place. The waitress with the too big collar came to Emily's table with a new plate. Scrambled eggs, wheat toast, orange juice, so all of it arranged with slightly more care than usual. The toast cut diagonally the way Emily hadn't asked for but had always privately preferred. The girl set it down. She straightened up. She looked at Emily, finally fully the way she hadn't been able to all morning. "I'm sorry I didn't do more," she said. "I kept thinking someone else would, and then no one did, and I'm sorry." She was 19, Emily thought. 19 and scared and working for tips, and she had, at the end, picked up her phone and called the address in. That had mattered. "You called it in," Emily said. "Too late." "But you did." The girl's eyes were bright. She pressed her lips together. She nodded and went back to the counter before anything else could happen on her face. Emily looked at her plate, at the eggs and the toast, and the small glass of orange juice that had gone warm in the wait. She picked up her fork. She ate. Around her, the bikers settled into the diner, the way water settles into its natural level, not noisily, not making a show of themselves, just occupying the space with the comfortable mass of people who know how to be somewhere. They pulled tables together. They ordered food. They talked among themselves in the low shorthand of men who have ridden long distances together and are ready for something that isn't moving. Ryder stayed at Emily's table. He ordered eggs and black coffee. He ate without rushing. He didn't fill the silence with conversation. He seemed to understand, with the instincts of someone who has been around enough people to read what they need, that Emily didn't need to be talked at right now. She needed to eat her breakfast. She needed to do the ordinary thing that had been stolen from her and reclaimed and was now finally simply available. So she ate. And the diner filled with sound, real sound, the clatter of silverware and the murmur of conversation, and the bell above the door as two more customers came in, looked at the room full of bikers, looked at each other, shrugged and sat down. And Rosie moved behind the counter with her steady hands and her gray braid and her reading glasses on her forehead, and the coffee maker cycled through its process, and on Route 9 outside the cars came and went. Emily finished the last of her toast. She put down her fork. She looked at Ryder. He was watching her not intrusively, just that steady attending quality of attention she'd felt since he'd walked in. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yeah," he said. "The things you said to him, to that boy." She paused. "You said you were like him once. Is that true, or were you just saying it to reach him?" Ryder was quiet for a moment. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "Both," he said. "The best things you say are usually both." Emily looked at him. "Did someone sit you down the way you sat him down?" she said. "Yeah," he said. "What happened?" He was quiet for a long moment, long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "It didn't take the first time or the second it took." He paused. "It took what it took." He looked at her. "But I remembered it, every time. I remembered the person who bothered to say it, and eventually that was the thing that mattered." Emily thought about that, about the long, uneven arithmetic of how people change or don't, and what gets remembered. "Do you think he'll remember it?" she said. "I think there's a chance he will," Ryder said, "especially because you were still in that chair when he said it, still in the room. That's harder to forget than the version where someone just let him leave." Emily looked at the door, at the empty corner booth which Rosie had already begun to reset new napkins. Clean glasses, the diner absorbing what had happened into its ongoing life. The way dinners do, the way places that see a lot of living do, without spectacle, without pause. The booth looked exactly the same as it always had, which was wrong and right at the same time. Ryder said, "What are you doing for the rest of the day?" Emily picked up her coffee cup. The coffee had reached exactly the right temperature. "I don't know yet," she said. "Fair enough," he said. He drank his coffee. She drank hers. Outside, the motorcycles waited in the parking lot, chrome catching the October light, which had shifted in the last hour from gray towards something almost warm, the kind of light that comes out after weather and makes everything look briefly like it's being seen for the first time. Emily didn't know it yet, but she was not going home the same way she had come. She didn't know that Ryder Cole had something in his jacket pocket that he'd been turning over in his fingers for the last 20 minutes deciding. She didn't know what was about to be offered to her or what saying yes would mean. She was just drinking her coffee. Finally, in peace, the bell above the door rang. The bell rang and nobody came through the door. Emily looked up. The door had swung open and then swung back without admitting anyone, the wind catching it, or someone outside thinking better of entering, or just the building doing what old buildings do, settling into themselves, breathing. Ryder looked at it too. Then he looked back at his coffee. "You were going to ask me something," Emily said. He looked at her. "Before," she said. "You asked what I was doing for the rest of the day. That wasn't actually what you were going to say." He was quiet for a moment. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but the precursor to one, the expression of a man who has been accurately read and isn't upset about it. "No," he said, "it wasn't." He reached into the inside pocket of his vest. What he put on the table was small. A card, but not a business card. Thicker, darker, the kind of thing that gets made deliberately rather than printed in bulk. On one side, a number. On the other, 3 words and a small symbol she didn't immediately recognize. Emily looked at it without touching it. "What is this?" she said. "It's a number," he said. "My number, and the chapter's number." He tapped the symbol side. "That's our patch. Maplewood adjacent technically, but we run through here regular. Have for 15 years. "I know what Hell's Angels are," Emily said. "I know you do," he said. "I'm not explaining the patch. I'm explaining the card." He picked up his coffee. "You've been coming to this diner 3 years. Rosie told me that while you were outside. She also told me you come alone, every time." Emily said nothing. "That's not a criticism," Ryder said. "I'm not suggesting you need a babysitter. I'm not suggesting anything about your capability. You made that clear to 4 boys this morning, and you made it clearer than most people twice your size would have." He set the cup down. What I'm saying is that this town, this road, this stretch of Route 9, we know it. We're on it. And if you ever need something or if something like this morning happens again, that number gets answered. Emily looked at the card. She had a complicated relationship with being offered things. 6 years in a wheelchair had taught her that offers came in shapes, the genuine ones, the performative ones, the ones that were really about the person offering and had her well-being as their secondary concern at best. She had developed out of necessity a fast and accurate taxonomy of which was which. She studied Ryder's face. He wasn't watching her study him. He was looking at the window at the parking lot at the gray-going gold light on the chrome of the bikes outside. He had put the card on the table and was now behaving exactly as he would if he hadn't, which was the most honest thing he could have done because it said, "This is available, not required. Take it or don't. I'm not going to perform generosity at you while you decide." She picked up the card. She turned it over once, put it in her bag. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. That was the whole of it. No ceremony, no speech. She'd half expected some declaration about brotherhood or protection or what the patch meant, and the absence of it landed with more weight than any of those things would have. From across the diner, one of the other bikers called out to Ryder in a voice that had the particular brevity of men who communicated in shorthand. Emily didn't catch the words. Ryder raised 2 fingers from the table, a gesture so minimal it barely qualified as one, and the other man nodded and went back to his food. "Your people," Emily said. "My people," Ryder agreed. She looked at them scattered through the diner, now filling the booths and the counter stools, ordering food, talking, a room completely transformed from what it had been an hour ago. Not because they'd done anything loud, not because they'd made any declarations, just because they were here and the specific gravity of their collective presence had rearranged the room's emotional architecture the way a heavy object rearranges the space around it. "How many?" Emily asked. "Here 31. He glanced around without counting. "We had a funeral Saturday. Brother of ours upstate. We were riding back." Emily absorbed that. A funeral. These men had buried someone on Saturday and were riding home through an October morning and had stopped at Rosie's for coffee and walked into this. "I'm sorry," she said, "about your brother." Ryder looked at her. Something moved in his face, the particular movement of a person receiving condolences from someone who has no obligation to offer them. "Thank you," he said. And then after a pause that had weight in it, "His name was Joe. He was 58. He'd been riding with us for 30 years. He used to say the road was the only thing that ever made him feel like himself." He looked at his coffee. "We figured the best way to do his funeral was to do what he loved. So we rode." Emily thought about that. About a man named Joe who felt most like himself on a road. About 31 people riding 400 miles because that was the only memorial that made sense. "That's a good funeral," she said. Ryder looked at her. This time the corner of his mouth completed the motion and became an actual smile, brief. Real, the kind that doesn't announce itself. "Yeah," he said. It was. The moment settled between them, neither awkward nor sentimental. Just 2 people sharing the particular warmth of having said something true to each other. Emily hadn't expected to feel anything like warmth this morning. The morning had not seemed like it was going to produce anything like this. Then Rosie appeared at the table. Not with coffee, not with food. Rosie appeared at the table the way she appeared when she had something to say and had been waiting for the right moment to say it. Her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, her hands folded in front of her expression carrying the specific combination of guilt and determination that Emily had seen on her face exactly once before the morning she'd called Emily to tell her that the step at the side entrance had been repaired, and she'd added a second ramp at the back, and she wasn't going to make a big thing of it, but she wanted Emily to know. "I need to say something," Rosie said. "Rosie," Emily started. "No," Rosie said. "Let me." She looked at Emily directly in the way of someone who has decided not to hedge. "I've known you 3 years. I know your coffee order and your favorite table and the anniversary of your mama's death, and I know you take your eggs scrambled with no salt because the sodium bothers your blood pressure. I know all of that." She paused. "And this morning when those boys," she stopped, reset. "I hesitated. I picked up that phone and I put it back down twice before I called. And while I was putting it down and picking it up, you were out there in my parking lot alone in the cold." Emily looked at her. "Why, boys?" Emily said, not accusatory, genuinely asking. She had wondered in the parking lot while she sat and breathed and watched the gray sky. She had wondered about all of them, the man with the coffee cup, the young waitress, the couple near the back, but she had wondered about Rosie most. Rosie, who had always made it feel like this was a safe place. Rosie was quiet for a long moment. Because I was afraid they'd hurt someone if I pushed them, she said. Because there were 4 of them and I'm 62 and there's only me until the lunch shift. Because I thought someone else would do it first. She looked down at her hands. Because I chose the safety of my diner over the safety of you. And that was wrong, and I'm not going to dress it up. The room was not paying attention to this, or it was pretending not to, which was its own form of courtesy. The bikers ate their food. The other customers talked. The diner did what it did. Emily looked at Rosie. She thought about what it cost a woman to stand in front of someone she cared about and say, I failed you specifically, and I'm naming how. She thought about how much easier it would have been to say, I'm sorry, and pour more coffee and let the morning move on. I know, Emily said, and I'm not, she stopped, started again. I'm not going to tell you it's fine, because it wasn't fine. But I'm also not going to pretend I don't know what fear looks like or what it does to people because I've been afraid every day for 6 years, and fear has made me do things I wasn't proud of either. She paused. You called Ryder's people, and you called 911, and you put the pound cake on my bill, and you sent me new eggs without being asked. That's not nothing. Rosie pressed her lips together. She was not going to cry in her own diner. Emily could see that decision written in the set of her jaw, but it was a near thing. Still, Rosie said. Still, Emily agreed. But you're still my Tuesday. Rosie looked at her. The reading glasses shifted on her forehead. She reached out and put her hand over Emily's briefly firmly, and then she straightened up and she went back behind the counter because that was where she needed to be, and they both knew it. Ryder had watched all of that without comment. She's a good woman, he said when Rosie was out of earshot. Yeah, Emily said, she is. The good ones are the ones who admit when they got it wrong, he said. That's the whole test, really. Not whether you freeze. Everybody freezes. The test is what you do after. Emily looked at him. Is that the test you applied to yourself when you were the boy in the booth? He looked at her steadily. It's the test that got applied to me, he said, by someone who had a lot of reasons not to bother. She wanted to ask who. She didn't. Some things were offered in their own time, or not at all, and she had learned the difference between patience and intrusion. Her phone buzzed in her bag. She looked at it. Danielle, a text, hey, are you still at Rosie's? I drove by and there are like 40 motorcycles in the parking lot, and now I'm sitting on Route 9 trying to decide if I should be worried. Emily almost laughed. She typed back, come in, I'll explain. 40 seconds later, the bell above the door rang, and this time someone did come through it. Danielle was 30 years old, 5'2", wearing a yellow rain jacket that was unnecessary given the weather, and carrying the expression of a woman who has been preparing to be worried and has arrived to find a situation significantly more complicated than worry covers. She stood in the doorway and looked at the room full of bikers, and then looked at Emily at the window table, and then looked at the large, gray-haired man sitting across from Emily, and then looked back at Emily. Okay, she said across the room. So, come sit down, Emily said. Danielle came and sat down. She did it with the particular energy of someone operating on very high alert while trying to appear calm, which was a mode Emily recognized because Danielle had been her best friend for 8 years and had been operating in that mode on Emily's behalf for most of them. This is Ryder, Emily said. Danielle looked at him. Hi, Ryder. Hi, he said. Are you the reason there are 40 motorcycles in the parking lot? 31, he said. 31 motorcycles, Danielle said, in Rosie's parking lot on a Tuesday. We stopped for coffee, he said. Danielle looked at Emily. Emily looked back. In 8 years of friendship, they had developed a communication system that required no words for its most important exchanges. And right now, what passed between them was, yes, this is real. Yes, I'm okay. Yes, there is a lot to explain. Please hold. Danielle held. She ordered coffee from the young waitress who had straightened her collar. Emily noticed sometime in the last 20 minutes, and she sat with her hands around the mug, and she listened while Emily told her in the compressed, direct way she told Danielle things, because Danielle never needed the long version, what had happened that morning. She told her about the boys, about the plate on the floor, about the chair being shoved, twice, about the parking lot and the gray sky and sitting there breathing and deciding not to leave, about the sound that had started down Route 9 and built itself into something she felt in her sternum, about 31 motorcycles in a parking lot, and a man who had sat down across from her and asked plainly, "Are you all right?" Danielle listened. Her face went through several things during the telling: fury grief, something that in anyone else Emily might have called awe, but in Danielle was more like the satisfaction of a person who has always believed the world contained more good than it showed and has just been handed evidence. When Emily finished, Danielle looked at Ryder. "You made them apologize," she said. "She made them apologize," Ryder said. "She was still in the room. That was the thing that mattered." Danielle looked at Emily. Emily shrugged. "I came back in." Danielle put down her coffee. "You went back inside." "I wasn't going to let the parking lot be the last thing." Danielle stared at her for 3 full seconds. Then she said, "Emily Marie Carter," in a tone that contained a complete and detailed opinion about the courage and the stubbornness and the absolute exhausting necessity of the woman across from her. "Don't," Emily said. "I'm not doing anything," Danielle said, and picked up her coffee again, and her eyes were very bright and she was very deliberately looking at her mug. Something shifted in the diner then, not dramatically, just a small rearrangement of the room's attention, the way attention moves when something new has entered the equation. Emily felt it before she tracked it, a shift in the quality of sound, a change in the direction several people were looking. She followed the look. Dale was standing up. Dale, the man with the green canvas jacket and the 4 cups of coffee and the wedding ring, who had sat back down and then stood back up and had said, "I'm not sitting back down again." Dale was standing up and he was looking at Ryder with an expression that said he had been composing something for the last 30 minutes and had finally decided to say it. He crossed the room. He stopped at the table. He looked at Emily first. "Can I interrupt for a second?" he said. "It's a free country," Danielle said before Emily could answer, in the tone of someone who has heard the full story and has opinions about everyone in it. Dale looked at her, then back at Emily, then at Ryder. "I want to say something to you, Ma," Dale said to Ryder, "and I want to say it in front of her." He nodded at Emily, because she was here for all of it, and she deserves to hear it. Ryder said nothing, just waited. "When you walked in," Dale said, "and you sat down across from her instead of going straight at those boys, I watched that. I've been sitting here thinking about it since." He paused. "I've been in a lot of rooms where something needed doing, and people were waiting for someone else to start. And the person who starts, usually they go right at the problem. Make noise. Make a point of themselves." He looked at his hands. "You didn't do that. You sat down next to her first. And I keep thinking about why that mattered so much." Ryder looked at him. "It mattered," Dale said, "because it said the point was her, not them, not whatever lesson they needed. Her." Emily's hands went still in her lap. She hadn't thought about it that way. She'd experienced it, the specific quality of being seen first before anything else happened, but she hadn't put language to why it had hit her the way it did, why it had locked something in her chest that an hour of fear and anger and shame had locked up tight. The point was her, not the lesson, not the confrontation, not the moral of the story. Her Emily Carter in her wheelchair by the window, who had come in for scrambled eggs in a quiet hour with her book. Ryder looked at Dale for a moment. "Sit down with us," he said. Dale blinked. He hadn't expected that. "I mean it," Ryder said. "Sit down." Dale sat. Danielle moved over. There were 4 of them at the table now. Emily, Ryder. Danielle, Dale, and the waitress with the too big collar came over without being asked and refilled all their cups, and this time she looked at each of them when she did it directly, like a person who has decided to stop looking at the floor. "I want to ask you something," Ryder said to Dale. "When you sat back down the first time, what went through your head?" Dale looked at his coffee. "The math," he said. 4 of them. I'm 54. I wasn't sure what I'd actually be able to do, and I didn't want to make it worse for her by starting something I couldn't finish." "That's honest," Ryder said. "It's also a reason and an excuse at the same time," Dale said. "And I've been sitting here figuring out which part was real." "Both were real," Ryder said. "That's the thing about those moments. The reason and the excuse are always the same thing. The question is which one you lead with when you tell yourself the story afterward." Dale was quiet for a moment. Which one did you lead with when you were young and you were the one making the wrong call? Ryder turned his coffee cup in his hands. The excuse, he said, for a long time, until someone made it too costly not to. What made it costly? Dale asked. Someone got hurt, Ryder said, someone I cared about. And I had to live with the fact that I'd had a chance to prevent it and I'd led with the excuse. He looked at Dale. You stood back up. Before we got here, she told me. Dale glanced at Emily. She nodded slightly. You stood back up, Ryder said, when it would have been easier not to. That's not nothing. That's the thing that separates the story you tell yourself tonight from the one you would have told if you'd stayed sitting. Dale looked at him for a long moment. Something was happening in his face, not simple, not comfortable, the complicated work of a person integrating two things about themselves that existed at the same time and didn't cancel each other out. I'm going to think about this morning for a long time, Dale said. Yeah, Ryder said. You probably will. Danielle had been quiet through this exchange, which for Danielle was a significant feat of self-restraint, and she broke it now in the way she always broke silences that had run their course, not loudly, not abruptly, just a slight shift in posture, and then, can I ask you something, she said to Ryder. Sure, he said. What do you do when it's not four teenagers in a diner, when it's something you can't just walk into and sit down at a table? Ryder looked at her. What kind of something are you thinking about? I don't know, Danielle said. I'm thinking about Emily, about the fact that this morning wasn't the first time something like this has happened to her. Not the exact same thing, but things. Situations where the world made it clear that it wasn't built for her and didn't care that it wasn't. She looked at Emily, and I wasn't there for most of them. And you can't ride 31 motorcycles into most of them. The table was quiet. Emily said, Danielle. I know, Danielle said. I'm not trying to, she stopped. I just want to know what you do with the ones you can't fix by showing up. Ryder was quiet for a long moment. Emily watched him think, not performing thinking, actually doing it, turning the question over, the way he'd turned his coffee cup, feeling the weight of it. You show up to the ones you can, he said, and you make sure the people who've been through the ones you couldn't know that someone's going to show up to the next one. He looked at Emily. You give them the card. Emily reached into her bag. She put the card on the table between them. Danielle looked at it, picked it up, read both sides. Okay, she said. She handed it back to Emily. Okay. Emily put it back in her bag. Outside, one of the bikers had started his engine. Then another. The sound of it came through the glass like a familiar voice, not startling, not alarming, just present. Emily looked through the window at the parking lot and watched two bikes ease out toward Route 9, the riders moving with the easy, unhurried purpose of people who knew where they were going and were not in a hurry to stop being where they were. You're heading out, she said to Ryder. Soon, he said, we have got a few hours of road left. Where? Home, he said, east of here, about 120 miles. She thought about that. 120 miles of road, 31 bikes, Joe's absence in the formation, and everyone knowing exactly where it was. She thought about what that ride home would feel like with the October light on the highway, and the sound of all those engines in accord, and the weight of a Saturday funeral still fresh. Thank you, she said, for coming in. We came in for coffee, he said. Stop saying that, she said. This time the smile completed fully. It reached his eyes. Yeah, he said. All right. He stood up. He was taller standing than she ever quite registered until he did it. He put money on the table more than the meal cost, significantly more, laid flat and anchored under the coffee cup with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone who had done this before and wasn't interested in making a production of it. Emily looked at it. That's too much, she said. It covers yours and there, he said, nodding at Danielle and Dale. And something for Rosie. She runs a good place. Ryder. Emily. He said in a tone that said, this is done, let it be done, accept the thing. She accepted the thing. He pushed his chair back to where it belonged. He looked at the table, at Emily, at Danielle, at Dale, with the expression of a man who is leaving a place and has made his peace with that. Then he did something Emily had not anticipated. He reached up to his vest, to the front of it just below the left shoulder where a smaller patch was pinned, not sewn, pinned with the particular impermanence of something that has been moved before and might be moved again. He unpinned it. He held it for a moment. Emily looked at it. It was small, the size of a playing card roughly, and it said in the same red letters on white background as the larger patch, a single word, Support. He leaned down and he pinned it to the canvas tote bag sitting beside her wheelchair. Emily went very still. What does this mean? She said. Her voice was level. She kept it level. It means what it says, he said. It means when you're out on Route 9 and you need something, you've got people. It means if anyone in our network sees you and you need help, they'll know. He straightened. It means you're not riding alone. The whole diner had gone quiet again. Not the terrible quiet of the morning, the held breath quiet of people deciding not to see. This was different. This was the quiet of people who were watching something and knew enough to not interrupt it. Danielle's hand found Emily's under the table. Emily looked at the patch on her bag, then up at Ryder. I don't know what to say to that, she said. You don't have to say anything, he said. I'm going to say something anyway, she said, because she stopped. She was fighting very quietly the same thing she'd been fighting all morning, but this time it came from a different direction. Not pain, not shame, something she was less practiced at holding. Because I have spent 6 years learning how to need less, how to ask for less, how to take up less space and make less noise about the space I needed and make it easy for the world to not have to accommodate me. She looked at the patch. And I know that's wrong. I know my therapist would have a lot to say about that. But it's what I know how to do. She looked up. And this whole morning keeps asking me to know how to do something different. Ryder looked at her for a long moment. That's not a bad thing to figure out on a Tuesday, he said. Emily said nothing. She was pressing her jaw together for a different reason now. He put out his hand. She took it. His grip was the same as Dale's had been careful the care of a large person around a smaller one, but there was something additional in it, something that had to do with everything that had passed in the last hour and a half, the weight of a morning that had started one way and become something else entirely. Route 9, he said, any Tuesday. Route 9, she said. He let go. He walked to the counter. He said something to Rosie, something short, private, not for the room. Rosie listened. She nodded. She reached across the counter and put her hand briefly on his arm and said something back. He walked to the door. 2 of his men fell in behind him, then 3 more, the formation reassembling itself naturally without instruction. The bell rang. He went through. They went through. The parking lot received them. Emily watched through the window. She watched the engines start. She watched the bikes move. She watched 31 motorcycles organize themselves with the practiced ease of a group that has done this 10,000 times, pulling out onto Route 9 East into the October light that had moved fully from gray to gold while she was inside. The last bike was barely a sound when Dale spoke. Well, he said. Yeah, Danielle said. Emily didn't say anything. She was watching the last of the chrome disappear down Route 9. She had her hand resting on her tote bag on the patch Ryder had pinned there, the red letters on white. The words sat solid under her fingers. Support. She had spent 6 years learning how to need less of it. She thought about what Ryder had said the road was the only thing that ever made Joe feel like himself. She thought about 31 people riding 400 miles to say goodbye to someone who was most himself in motion. She thought about her own motion, the wheels, the navigation, the angle of entry, the years of practiced, precise management of a world that had not been designed with her in mind. She had always thought of the wheelchair as limitation, as the thing that defined the terms of her life. She had never, not once in 6 years, thought of it the way those riders thought of the road. That thought arrived in her quietly, without fanfare, in the tail end of a Tuesday morning in Rosie's diner on Route 9, with Danielle's hand on her arm and Dale sitting across from her, and Rosie moving steadily behind the counter and the patch on her bag under her fingers. She didn't know yet what to do with it, but she felt it, clean, and knew the way the light outside was clean, and knew the way things feel after weather. The coffee maker cycled. Rosie appeared with the lemon pound cake on a Tuesday on the right. Tuesday, the cake Emily had almost not made it to, and she set it down without a word, just the small white plate and the fork beside it. The way she always did. Emily looked at it. She picked up the fork. And Dale said very quietly, almost to himself, I'm going to call my son tonight. Emily looked up. Dale was looking at his coffee. He looked like a man who has made a decision that has been waiting for the right morning to make itself. We don't talk much, he said. I don't know why. We just drifted, the way people drift. He paused. But I watched a kid say sorry today who didn't know how, and I've been sitting here thinking about all the sorries I know how to say and haven't. Nobody responded. Nobody needed to. The table held it the way tables do when the right words have landed in the right company, and everyone understands that the correct response is simply to let them be there. Danielle caught Emily's eye. Emily looked back at her. 8 years of friendship, the language that needed no words. Are you okay? Yes, really getting there. Emily took a bite of the pound cake. Outside Route 9 was quiet. The motorcycles were gone. The chrome and the engines and the red on white patches were somewhere east of here now, carrying their formation home, carrying the space where Joe used to ride. The diner was warm. The cake was what it always was, dense and sweet, and exactly the right thing. Emily ate it slowly, the way you eat something you almost didn't get to have. The pound cake was gone. Emily had eaten every bite of it, which she never did. She always saved the last piece, a habit from childhood she'd never examined closely enough to break. But today she ate it all down to the crumbs, and she sat with the empty plate in front of her and felt the specific fullness of a person who has been running on adrenaline for 2 hours and has finally in the last 10 minutes started to come down. The coming down was its own kind of hard. It always was. She knew this from experience, from the hours after medical appointments that had gone badly, from the afternoons following the moments when the world had made its terms clear, and she'd had to absorb them without showing how much they cost. The adrenaline held you up, and then it left, and what it left behind was not relief exactly. It was more like the feeling of a room after furniture has been moved, the same dimensions, the same walls, but the space rearranged, and your body still remembering where everything used to be. She was aware of Danielle watching her, not intrusively. Danielle had a gift for this, for being fully present without pressing, for letting Emily have the shape of whatever she was going through, without trying to reshape it into something more manageable. It was one of the reasons they were still friends after 8 years, through the wheelchair and the grief and the rebuilding and all the ordinary difficult business of two people who had decided to keep choosing each other. Say it, Emily said. I haven't said anything, Danielle said. You're about to. Danielle looked at her coffee. I was thinking about the parking lot, she said, about you sitting out there alone. And I was thinking about all the other times you've been in the parking lot, metaphorically, whatever, and didn't call me. And I was trying to figure out how to say that without it sounding like I'm making this about me. It doesn't sound like that, Emily said. Good. Danielle looked up. Call me next time. I don't care what time it is. I don't care if it's a Tuesday morning at 8 a.m. or a Wednesday at 2 in the morning or whatever. You call me. Emily looked at her. I didn't want to fall apart in a parking lot, she said. I know, Danielle said. You never want to fall apart anywhere. That's the problem. Falling apart doesn't fix anything. No, Danielle said, but it's honest, and sometimes honest is the thing that's needed, not fixed. She leaned forward slightly. You came back into that diner by yourself. You held yourself together through all of it by yourself. And I'm not going to tell you that was wrong, because you're the most capable person I know, and you can handle things that would flatten most people. But you don't have to handle everything alone just because you can. The table was quiet. Dale across from them was looking at his phone. He'd pulled it out a few minutes ago, and Emily had assumed he was checking messages. But he wasn't scrolling. He was holding it the way you hold a phone when you're thinking about making a call you've been putting off. Are you going to call him? Emily asked. Dale looked up. He'd forgotten maybe that she'd heard him. My son, yeah. He looked back at the phone. I've been trying to remember the last time we talked. Really talked. Not logistics. Not the holidays. He set the phone face down on the table. I think it's been 2 years. Maybe more. What happened? Emily said. Nothing, Dale said. That's the thing. Nothing happened. No fight, no blow up. Just the calls got shorter and then further apart, and then I stopped noticing they'd stopped. He was quiet. And this morning I watched a 17-year-old boy stand in front of you and say the hardest thing he'd probably ever said, without a script, without knowing if it would do anything. He looked at his phone. And I'm 54 years old and I'm afraid to call my son. Danielle said, call him. Dale looked at her. Not later, she said. Now, go stand outside and call him. We'll be here. Dale looked at Emily. Emily nodded. He picked up his phone. He got up from the table with the particular deliberate heaviness of a man doing something he's made up his mind about before he can change it. He put on his green canvas jacket. He walked to the door and the bell rang and he was gone. Through the window, Emily watched him stand in the parking lot, the same parking lot where she'd sat alone an hour ago, and hold the phone to his ear. She looked away. That was his. Danielle was watching her again. "What are you thinking about?" Danielle said. "The patch," Emily said. Danielle glanced at the tote bag. "It's strange," Emily said. I've been staring at it and trying to figure out why it feels like so much more than what it is. It's a small piece of fabric. It doesn't change anything structural about my life. Those men are 100 miles away by now. And she pressed her hand flat on the bag. "I can't stop touching it." Danielle was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you remember what you said to me the week after the accident? When you'd just gotten out of the hospital and you were in the chair for the first time and you were trying to learn how to go through doors," Emily remembered. "You said," Danielle continued, "that the worst thing wasn't the pain, and it wasn't learning the chair. It was that you felt like you'd become invisible, like the wheelchair was this thing people saw instead of you, and you could tell that they were more comfortable looking at the chair than at your face." Emily's throat tightened. "Yeah," she said. "That man Ryder walked into a room full of people who had spent an hour looking at the chair," Danielle said. "And the first thing he did was look at your face." She paused. "That's what the patch is. That's why you can't stop touching it. It's not about protection. It's about the fact that someone saw you, really saw you, and then gave you something physical to hold so you'd remember it happened." Emily looked at her. 8 years of this, of Danielle finding the exact right words at the exact right moment, not because she tried to, but because she paid attention. Because she had always looked at Emily's face. "I'm going to need you to stop being this insightful," Emily said. "It's genuinely destabilizing." Danielle smiled. It reached all the way up. "Never." Rosie appeared with fresh coffee. Neither of them had asked for, which was Rosie's love language in its purest form, the anticipation of need, the quiet delivery, the refusal to make a ceremony of care. "How are you doing, honey?" she said to Emily. Not the polite version of the question. The real one. "I'm figuring it out," Emily said. "That's the right answer," Rosie said. She looked at the empty pound cake plate. "You finished it." "First time," Emily said. "I know," Rosie said. "I've been waiting 3 years for that." She took the plate and went back to the counter. Emily wrapped both hands around her fresh coffee. Outside, Dale was still on the phone. She could see him through the window, his back to the diner, his hand moving slightly as he talked the particular body language of a conversation that was going somewhere. The diner had thinned out. The lunch crowd hadn't arrived yet. That was another hour away, and the morning customers had mostly gone the aftermath of the biker's visit, settling into the room's ongoing history, the way everything settles slowly like sediment, finding its level. The young waitress Emily had learned her name was Kara, from the way Rosie had addressed her twice in the last half hour, was resetting tables with the steady, methodical energy of someone who has decided that doing the work in front of her is the best way to process the morning she's had. Emily watched her. "Kara," she said. The girl looked up. "Thank you for calling it in," Emily said. "I meant to say it more directly before. You called the address in when it mattered. That was something." Kara put down the salt shaker she'd been moving. She looked at Emily with the clear, slightly wrecked expression of a 19-year-old who has spent the last 2 hours calculating and recalculating her own actions and finding the sum insufficient. "I froze first," she said. "And then you didn't," Emily said. "It took too long." "Kara," Emily waited until the girl met her eyes. "You're 19. You were alone in a room with 4 people who had already decided they weren't going to behave. You froze and then you acted. That's human. That's what humans do." She paused. "The ones who scare me are the ones who never act at all. You acted." Kara pressed her lips together, nodded, went back to the salt shakers. Danielle leaned toward Emily and said very quietly, "You know you've been taking care of everyone in this room for the last hour." Emily looked at her. "I'm not." "You thanked Dale. You thanked Rosie. You just did whatever that was with Kara." Danielle's voice was soft and precise. "You had the worst morning. You're the one who got hurt. And you've spent the last hour making sure that everyone else who failed to stop it feels okay about themselves." Emily opened her mouth, closed it. Danielle said, "I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying notice that you're doing it. Notice it and ask yourself if it's because you want to or because you've trained yourself to make everyone else's discomfort more urgent than your own. The question landed. It didn't land gently. It landed the way true things do when they've been waiting for exactly the right moment, with a precision that made Emily feel briefly exposed, turned over, examined. Like being asked to look at something that had been at the edge of her vision for years and had never quite come into focus until someone else pointed at it. She looked at her hands. Both, she said. Probably both. Yeah, Danielle said. Probably, but the noticing is the start. The bell rang. Dale came back in. He sat down at the table and he put his phone in his jacket pocket and he looked at them with the expression of a man who has been through something and is not sure yet what to call it. How'd it go? Danielle said. He answered, Dale said. Emily waited. He was surprised, Dale said. I called him at work. I don't think I've ever called him at work before. He kept asking if something was wrong. He looked at his coffee. It took me 5 minutes to convince him nothing was wrong and I just wanted to talk. He didn't know what to do with that. Neither did I. He was quiet for a moment. But we're having dinner next Sunday. He's driving down. The table absorbed that. Good, Emily said. Yeah, Dale said. He looked at her. You started this. No, I didn't, Emily said. You were already carrying it. This morning just made it heavy enough that you put it down. Dale looked at her for a moment. That's generous, he said. It's accurate, she said. He nodded. He drank his cold coffee and didn't ask for it to be replaced and seemed not to notice that it was cold. Then Danielle said, What are you doing with the rest of your day? It was addressed to Emily. Emily looked at her. I don't know, she said for the second time this morning. Come to mine, Danielle said. We'll watch something terrible on television and eat whatever's in my refrigerator, and you can tell me everything you didn't tell me in the edited version. Emily looked at her. There's an unedited version, Danielle said. There always is. You can tell me that one. Emily thought about her apartment, about the particular silence of it which she had always valued and which today felt different in her imagination. Not peaceful, just empty, the kind of empty that asked too many questions. She thought about Danielle's apartment, which was always slightly too warm and had a cat named Gerald who had strong opinions about laps, and she thought about the specific relief of being somewhere that didn't require her to be fine. Okay, she said. Yeah. Danielle picked up her yellow rain jacket. Emily reached for her tote bag. Her hands settled on the patch again, a reflex now. She noticed automatic the way you reach for something you have decided to keep. She lifted the bag onto her lap. She looked at the room. At Rosie behind the counter, moving through her morning with the competent steadiness that had kept this place running for 30 years and would keep it running for 30 more. At Kara, resetting the last of the tables, her collar still slightly crooked, but her posture changed, something incremental and important altered in the way she held herself. At the table where the boys had been the corner booth, which Rosie had reset twice already and would reset 100 times more, the diner absorbing the morning into its walls, the way old places absorb everything without judgment, without forgetting. She looked at Dale. Drive safe, she said. Always, he said. He stood up, he put on his jacket. He looked at her with the full direct look of a man who had arrived at something and knew it. Thank you, Emily. For what? For coming back through that door, he said. If you hadn't come back in, I think I would have gone home and talked myself into believing I'd done enough, that I'd done my bit and the rest wasn't mine to carry. He paused. You coming back in made it impossible to believe that. Emily looked at him. She thought about the moment in the parking lot when she turned her chair around. The cold air and the gray sky and the sound of them laughing through the glass and the part of her, the part below strategy, below, planning the part where her mother's voice lived that had said not the parking lot, not the last thing. She hadn't done it for Dale. She hadn't done it for anyone in that room. She'd done it for herself, for the specific stubbornness of a woman who had spent 6 years refusing to be made smaller than she was. But it had done something for Dale. That was the part she hadn't accounted for. That showing up for yourself sometimes shows other people the door. I just came back from my book, she said. Dale almost laughed. It surprised him, she could see. It surprised him, and then he did laugh, a real one, the kind that doesn't have anything performed about it. He raised a hand. He walked to the door. The bell rang. He was gone. Danielle was watching Emily with the expression she wore when she was filing something away permanently. What? Emily said. Nothing, Danielle said. Ready? Give me a minute. Danielle nodded. She pulled on her jacket and moved toward the door, giving Emily the space she'd asked for without asking why she needed it. Emily sat at her table by the window. She sat there and she let herself feel the full weight of it. Not managed, not compressed into something more portable, just the actual size of what the morning had been. The fear, the shame, the parking lot, the sound of 31 engines coming down Route 9. The way Ryder's eyes had found her face before they found anything else. The apology that had cost a 17-year-old boy more than he'd expected to pay. Rosie's steady hands and Kara's unsteady ones, and Dale in the parking lot with his phone finally doing what it had needed to do. The patch on her bag? You're not riding alone. She had spent 6 years learning how to be alone well, how to move through a world that required constant negotiation and manage it without complaint, without drama, without asking for more than the minimum she could survive on. She had called it independence. She had called it strength. She had been right about some of it. She understood, now sitting in Rosie's diner on a Tuesday morning with a cracked spine and a canvas bag with a patch on it, and 12 pages of a book she hadn't finished, she had also been wrong about some of it. Not because needing less was inherently wrong, but because she had confused needing less with being worth less. Had confused self-sufficiency with the belief that her needs were a burden that the world shouldn't have to carry, that accommodation was a favor and not a right, that she should be grateful for the space she was given, rather than clear about the space she deserved. The boys this morning had believed she deserved no space at all. Ryder had believed she deserved the whole room. The distance between those two things was not something she could close in a single morning, but she could feel it. She could feel the size of it. And feeling the size of something is always the first step toward moving through it. She looked out the window. Route 9 ran east toward a sky that had gone fully gold. Now the morning burned clear by the October sun, finally doing what it had been threatening to do all day. She couldn't see the motorcycles. They were long gone 100 miles more, moving through that gold light in their formation, with the space where Joe used to ride held open by the people who loved him. She thought about Joe, a man she'd never met who had died on a Saturday, whose friends had ridden 400 miles and stopped for coffee and walked into a diner on Route 9 and changed the temperature of her morning in ways she was going to be sorting through for months. She hoped he'd known when he was alive that he was surrounded by people like that, people who showed up, people who didn't sit back down. She thought he probably had. She put her hands on her wheels. She rolled to the counter. Rosie was there. She looked up. "I'll see you next Tuesday," Emily said. Rosie held her gaze. "The pound cake will be ready," she said. "I'll eat all of it again," Emily said. Rosie smiled, the real one, the one that rearranged her whole face, the one Emily had been seeing every second Tuesday for 3 years and had never gotten tired of. Emily rolled to the door. She pushed through it. The bell rang behind her. The October air hit her cold and clean and shot through with sunlight, completely different from the air she'd rolled out into an hour and a half ago. Same temperature probably, same road, same parking lot, different everything. Danielle was waiting by her car, hands in her jacket pockets, face tipped up toward the sun. She heard the bell and turned and looked at Emily with the uncomplicated gladnesses of a person who is always glad to see the other person come through the door. "Ready," she said. Emily stopped her chair at the edge of the parking lot where the asphalt met the sidewalk. She looked at Route 9, at the gold light on the road, at the empty stretch of highway that ran east toward wherever 31 motorcycles had gone. She thought about the card in her bag, the patch on her bag, the ruined spine of her paperback, the 12 pages she still hadn't read. She thought about what Ryder had said: the road was the only thing that ever made Joe feel like himself. She thought about her wheels on the ground, the angle of entry, the practice push. 6 years of moving through a world that hadn't been built for her, and moving through it anyway every day with a precision and a persistence that she had never once let herself call what it actually was. She had been calling it survival. She looked at the road. She thought maybe it was always the ride. "Ready?" she said. She didn't look back at the diner. She didn't need to. Rosie was inside. Kara was inside. The booth in the corner had been reset. The morning had happened and been absorbed and would keep happening in the way that mornings do in memory, in the small permanent adjustments it made to the people who had been present for it, in Dale's drive home, in a phone call on a Sunday, and 31 riders carrying a formation east through gold October light. It would keep happening. She let Danielle open the car. She transferred herself with the efficiency of long practice. She folded the chair. She got in. Danielle started the engine. They pulled out of Rosie's parking lot onto Route 9, heading west, away from the direction the bikes had gone toward Danielle's apartment, and Gerald, the opinionated cat, and something terrible on television, and the long, unedited version of the morning that Emily had not told yet and was ready now to tell. Emily rested her hand on her tote bag. On the patch. On the single word that had been given to her by a gray-haired man who had stopped for coffee and stayed for something larger than coffee, who had knelt beside her wheelchair and looked at her face and understood in 30 seconds what 40 people had spent an hour refusing to see. She didn't know if she would ever call the number on the card. She didn't know if she would see Ryder Cole again, or if the patch would mean anything practical in the ordinary run of her days, or if this morning would become a story she told at dinner parties, or a thing she kept quiet in private and returned to when she needed it. She didn't know any of that. What she knew was this: she had come into Rosie's diner that morning as a woman who had spent 6 years learning to take up less space. And she was leaving it as a woman who had spent 2 hours being reminded by the worst of people and the best of people, and everyone complicated in between, that the space she occupied was not a negotiation. It was hers. It had always been hers. And no one, not 4 boys in a corner booth, not a room full of people looking at their coffee cups, not 6 years of a world that hadn't been designed with her in mind, no one had ever actually had the power to take it from her. She had only ever given it away. She was done giving it away. Route 9 moved under the car. The October light was full and clean and everywhere. Emily Carter sat in the passenger seat with her hand on her bag and her eyes on the road, and the particular expression of a woman who has been through something real and has come out the other side of it not unscathed, never unscathed, but certain. Certain of what she was, certain of what she was worth. Certain that the next time the world tried to make her smaller, she would remember the sound of 31 engines coming down Route 9, and she would remember that she had been sitting in a cold parking lot waiting for exactly that sound without knowing it. And she would remember that she had gone back through the door. She had gone back through the door. And that, more than anything else, more than the patch or the card or the apology or the morning's slow return of gold light, that was the thing she would carry. That was the thing that belonged to her completely, that no one had given her, that no one could pin on her bag or press into her hand or offer from the inside pocket of a leather vest. She had walked back through that door herself, on her own wheels, and the world had never looked the same again.